Welcome everyone for another episode of Modern Business Operations. Today I have the pleasure of hosting Daniel Barnes. Hey man, good to have you.
Hey, pleasure to be here.
Well, Daniel, you're the founder and host of World of Procurement and the head of community at Gatekeeper. That's
It's busy.
that's a pretty busy, it's a pretty big deal. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you end up in just in general in this world of leading a community and hosting social and podcasts but also how did you end up in procurement?
Yeah. So getting into procurement, it's fairly straightforward in that I was studying law at uni and I was like, all right, I love law, just love the commercial aspect. I was thinking of going into criminal law and then did some work experience and the barrister was like, don't do this, it sucks, there's no money. And I was like, okay, where's the money? It's like commercial law. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. I'm doing a commercial law degree. Makes sense. So I did that, I did a master's in it. And I just got to a point where I was like, do you know what? I didn't know if I quite want to do the whole commercial barrister bit. But then through research, I came across this commercial type role, which was like legal and this thing called procurement. And I was like, what is, I get all the, like the contracting and stuff like that. And I was like, what? Literally, the day before the interview for this grad role, I was like, I don't know what procurement is. I was on Wikipedia, just like going through it. And I was like, man, I have no idea what this is. Got the role anyway. And they're fairly chill about that. I was fairly honest about it. And then I just, and I'll be really open. It's not like a really nice story at the start. Like I actually hated it for like 2-3 years. And I was like, I think I'm just going to rethink my life, go away and do something else. And then fortunately, I got into a cool consultancy gig and then started to think about, there's a lot of bad procurement out there, a lot of bad buy-in, a lot of bad contracting. It's a lot of bad processes, just this whole entire mess. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to start making content about this and, fairly green to this space. But I was like, you know what? I think I can make fairly compelling content because the content in the space is dull. And yeah, just kept going and snowboard. And yeah, we're here in 2024. We're still doing the same thing.
It's amazing to me how much when you look in an area that is so core to a lot of companies, so core to how the economy works really. But you use the word dull, but it's so, and many times stuck in time, frozen time.
Yeah,
Right?
that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
The opportunity to being creative, invent new things is across all of it, right? Whether it's from a technology perspective to improving methodologies and a way to go about it, organizational construct even, but all the way to your point to what is the content, how those people think about it. And you really became a big influence in that space now. How's that feel?
Yeah, it's weird. I'll be perfectly honest because it makes me laugh. I don't really like track too many numbers. Like the only number I actually care about is like my YouTube channel because I really want to get a 100,000 play button I can hang up on my wall. That's the only one I really care about, and that's like pure vanity. And I just love the look of it. But I can remember talking about a lot of what I was talking about in my the roles prior to content, and even like when I started doing content. And honestly, the looks of derision and like really bad feedback I get from some people, I was like, oh man, am I just completely like barking up the wrong tree? Am I just a little bit weird? And I probably am, but am I like wasting my time with this? Because a lot of people I talk to don't really seemingly think like this. And I thought, you know what? I think to what you just said, procurement is often stuck in time, and so many different organizations of different sizes, they rely on precedents, much like lawyers do with their contract clauses and wording and ways of doing things. And you end up just getting these cycles of just do the same kind of things, try and do the same kind of changes in the same ways that have already failed. And that cycle just seemingly doesn't break. And I think it only actually breaks once you start to bring tech in. And that's why I've focused on always talking about tech at the heart of this transformation of procurement, moving away from a stuck in time dinosaur, just really poor and not a value adding function, to something that, if leveraged correctly, could do incredible things. Like you said, it's super important to the economy, to the world. We see the impacts of poor supply chains, broken supply chains at the moment. I think if you can get on top of so much of this, quite literally, people have better lives. So yeah, it's something I'm nerdy and passionate about.
And I think you touched on something that I think is very interesting to a lot of listeners here too, which is quite even wider than procurement. And in general, when you think about all the way to the end with the impact of changing some of those things you got used to, of this is how it works, this is what it is, improving those can go all the way to improving people's lives. But also the fact that sometimes the only way to force change and force progress or even growth is with externality that, in enterprises, at least in the world of companies, right, comes in either macroeconomics, which happens recently,
Yeah.
but also with dynamic changes when new tech comes in. And I think you mentioned you had also consulting gig, and I think I've got the opportunity to talk to in this podcast with many consulting folks or people that help leaders in companies really think about some of those transformation. When you came into this world of procurement, pun not intended, and was started thinking about how do I educate this group of individuals and introduce to them new ideas and new concepts. What works?
Yeah.
What do you think brings people attention to it? Because I think a lot of those concepts, to be an influencer in a social, I think a lot of things can then be learned from when you're in an organization trying to push an agenda, push an idea, improve on a process, improve on strategy. So I'm trying to basically create some of that analogies to learn from the things that might work for you when you're trying to teach the community on new concepts.
Yeah, it's a super good question. And I always think back to, there's always a conversation before any one of those gigs start, right? And then sometimes it feels a bit like an interview. Sometimes it feels like a chilled out conversation like we're having now. But that moment there, right, before you even start working together, that's so vital there, because you can share a prelude of your ideas and what you're passionate about, and get a sense of their problems, their pain points. And I know we spoke a couple of weeks ago, Sagi, for the Water Procurement podcast, and you were talking about Tonkin, and you bring in sort of these sales and marketing ideas and concepts into the product side of things. I also think that procurement need to think like that as well, about how they engage with people. And too often we're so fast and so quick to jump in about trying to solve a problem that maybe doesn't exist. So really spend the time to figure out, like, what does your prospect, your potential client, your colleagues, what's actually troubling them? What are their concerns? Really listen, and don't necessarily start talking straight away. Really go away and think about it. And I'm not saying go away and think about it for a month. You've got to act very quickly. But you'll probably find that there's numerous avenues to go down that you had never considered before. And the reason being is that you've now figured out, actually, they've got these 3 pain points here. They're actually really simple. We're just doing something over this side really poorly, or maybe the process isn't quite right, or they just want better visibility of things. There's really simple ways to solve a lot of this. So I think that that's just one really good thing, which is actively listen, ask the right questions, figure out the pain points. But then also, like, you need to truck in some of your ideas as well. Outside of those pain points, you need to show, like, oh, well, if you're asking me to come in because you've got a underperforming team, or you've got an underperforming project, that's typically what I used to work on, was like underperforming projects that are losing money, at risk of breaching contracts with their customer. And it's just in a bit of chaos right now. And like, I'm going to share some ideas that I think is going to work up front. And they're going to be like, we're going to make everything super lean. We're going to make things more agile. We're going to break stuff up that you probably got in place already. And we may try and start a lot of it again, because it sounds like the direction you've gone down maybe isn't the right one. And if they're not on board with that up front, then hey, we're probably not going to work together. But if you show some willingness there, maybe to compromise, or to let your processes or whatever you've got be unleashed upon sort of my ideas, then I think that's good. And then just honestly, I think people overcomplicate this so much, but just being able to talk with people on it, like, it's not hard. Just really communicate heavily of what you're doing and why you're doing it, and the benefits it will bring in every single thing. And equally, I've worked with too many people that will start doing something, and I'll be asking them like, "Hey, why are you working on this? Like right now, like what are you doing?" "Oh, it's because we've always done it, or we do it like this." And I'm like, "But why?" And they're like, "Oh, I don't know. Like when I joined, we started doing things this way." And they're not saying, "Oh, we've always done it this way," but by their actions, by their conduct, and everything else. There's a lot of that, and I've always found that the bigger the organization, there's a lot more of a sort of bad habits or just precedences and things like that that kind of build up over the culture. And that's why I'm actually a really big fan of bringing consultants in, good consultants, not necessarily over price consultants that just send fancy stuff around. But people who can have that outside perspective, and it doesn't have to be a consultant; it can be a new employee or something like that. But I think just being able to communicate why you're doing something, the benefit it can bring, and equally, if it doesn't bring that benefit, really analyze that and figure out why and communicate that. So I just think this clarity in communication is so often overlooked, and it's such a minor thing. And you sometimes have to do it on a one-on-one level, a one-to-many level, a one-to-a-whole company level. But for me, it's just the basics of like how do we communicate as humans, and the best way is this is the second best way for us, Sagi, because we're not in person with a cold beer in front of us. That would be the best way.
Absolutely. Uh, if you try to extend it, as you were talking about it, and I completely agree, like listening, but also there's so many different versions of communication. And I think people, so one thing that kind of intrigues me is the concept of influencing. I think the word influencer is now used when you think about influencing on a more public, broader
Like
community.
Instagram.
Yeah, like Instagram.
Instagram
Exactly.
influencers, I think they've appropriated the word somewhat.
Exactly. But in enterprises and in companies, and we talk about sales and marketing, but like there's always been the concept of there is an influencer within the company, right? On a
Yeah.
specific topic, right? Someone that basically believes in a certain change that is needed, that believes that we should do something different than the way we did it when I joined, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's
Right.
it. Yeah.
And a lot of time, whether you are consulting, whether it's your piece of technology, whether you're a new leader, whether you're a new employee and you want to instill change or modernize the way you work, part of what you do, you need to find different type of influencers and you need to become an influencer yourself.
Yeah.
And what I'm worried about is there's not enough examples or content out there of how to do that effectively.
Mm,
You
yeah.
know, to be an influencer on Instagram, it's a very different, it's a different,
Yeah, it's a really good point, by the way. And I hadn't actually really thought about it quite that way. But anyone who's brought a piece of tech, regardless of what team you're in, there's always like that influencer, that champion of that tech. And then you're like, oh, I can't wait to show this to everyone. And then it suddenly dawns on you, like, oh, I've got to share this now. And my reputation's on the line. But when you start to go around, and hopefully you've done this earlier on and not after you've brought it, right? You'll find those little pockets of people that are like, yes, we absolutely need this. And you'll find those people, the naysayers, oh no, we don't want to go anywhere near that. And that challenge is get the people who are really on board to try and evangelize it even more. That's fairly straightforward to some extent because they're already brought on. But like, how do you be the unconverted at that point? Some of them will never be, and you just have to accept that. And some of them will just need more training, more help, more attention. But it is a really good point in terms of there's not much content about how do you become that person. And I think my only advice, my only thoughts around that is like whenever you're coming into somewhere new or you've been somewhere for a while, you always have to think of what you're doing as an iteration. You're never quite finished, right? Like you can build a process, you can bring a new piece of tech in, maybe whatever it is you're doing, right? You've done it well, it's all good. But in a month, 2 months, whatever time frame you want to put on it, you need to go back, review it, speak to more people, figure out if it's working. I think I know we're leaning on sort of sales and marketing, but sales teams are really good at this with like their current customers, like always figuring out, always communicating with them. Is there anything we could do better? Is there anything we're doing amazing? And they're using that data, that information to, I know they're doing it to make sales, right? They're trying to upsell. But if you take that sort of methodology, you can upsell what you're doing within your business a lot better. You can build better, you can build differently. So I'd almost say don't just think the job's done at any one point. It's always 2 iterations. They don't have to be huge, but to always be thinking about, oh, how can we make this a little bit better tomorrow?
Yeah. Also, it's building on that. I think it's also important to understand that it's not a nice to have. I think you need to choose to be an influencer on Instagram, right? You're not. What I mean by that. Not everyone needs to be.
Yeah.
It's a thing you choose to do. But I think if you are a leader in a company, in any level, or if you're an operation role that literally is like purpose is to improve the operation of
Yes, the glue of the company ops, right?
yeah,
Like that's why I love like the whole
exactly.
operations piece. Like you bring everyone together. They may hate you, some may love you, but it's vital, right? To
Exactly.
be in that kind of position of influence so that you can get what you need done to keep the business ticking over to make it better. Yeah.
Exactly. And then you extend it to, I speak to procurement leaders and legal leaders and IT leaders and HR leaders. And it's very common for folks to say, we want to be more strategic. Our
Yeah.
goal is to be more strategic, more sit on the table. There's many ways people call it, but I think it is important to understand that to do that, you need to be an influencer within within your world, within your company, within your department. And that is not an easy thing to do. And I think the one thing that is shared, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the influencer between us, and you can tell me if I got it right or not. It's every day. Like you need to work at it all the time. You need to communicate all the time, multiple times. You need to think about how you communicate. You need to listen to people. Like everything you mentioned, it is not a one-time project. As long as you want to do it, you need to continue to do it. And I think people sometimes think about it as oh, they want the result,
Without,
but the work
yeah.
without the price. And not saying the price is good or bad, it's just the price, right? It's
Yeah.
just what it
Yeah.
takes, to do that. And I think looking at it from the perspective of now I'm going to put my CEO hat, like you only promote people and you only give opportunities to people that are influencers, that are actually can influence a strategy, that can actually come up with it, but also bring people behind them and make things happen. So in many ways, taking the chance on a new idea, on a change of process, and of course, technology is part of it, but it's not about technology. It's about we need to do what we do differently to be better.
Yeah.
It's always a risk, but if you don't put the risk, then you're not gonna get that promotion. You're not gonna impact the business, and you're not gonna be um, reaping the reward. So I think I just as you were talking about it, right? I think it's the construct behind it too is this is not a one-time thing. You don't need to go and talk to people once and okay, I'm good. Or prepare for a communication session. You might have like all hands or whatever it is that you're presenting in. It is a continuous thing, essentially part of the job. And if anything, with technology and because you cannot touch on AI these days. But when you think about where technology is going, it is further obvious that the simple tasks, quote unquote simple, they can be very complex, but it's like the straightforward, I need to do this job and complete it. This is something that technology is always trying to replace first.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, those repetitive, the ones that need a few clicks to get done. Yeah, I'm with you by the way on this because it is an everyday thing, and you know, that's within your organization, right? Like not social media influence or anything like that. Within your organization, every single day, you, you need to be thinking about like, how am I communicating with this team? Maybe this team over here needs something different. So maybe if you're figuring out like your contingent labor, your forces with HR, like how does that differ from your software development team and their requirements? How hands-on, how hands-off are you? How do you empower one team? How do you empower the other team? They're probably going to require very different things. They're going to need your help. The help's going to be different. They also need your ideas. They have ideas. So a matter of making them feel like you're listening to them and not just saying, do it this way, put this policy in place, put this process in place, do it this way, or don't bother doing it at all. Being incredibly collaborative is, I think, a shortcut to build an influence. Of course, you still have to have some sort of opinion. It's not being collaborative
Yeah, point of
as
view.
being a pushover, right? Like you
need
need
a point
to
of
have
view,
something. Yeah. And I think if you do that daily, your influence in whatever sphere you're in will slowly, and I think it is slowly, it will slowly build.
Yeah, it's true. That's another good point. It's never overnight.
Yeah.
Even if it makes, even if sometimes it feels like it. Someone
Yeah.
like ranking up going up the rank quickly, or even in Instagram, you feel like, oh, you just
Yeah.
see this person everywhere now. But really, it's a lot of work before that. Where do you think, this is, by the way, extremely interesting, I think, in general concept, bringing some of that external social change that is happening and see like how does that impact work. So thank you for that. This is
Yeah, no, it's good fun to talk about for sure.
what maybe to, as we get closer to wrap up, I think there has been a lot of changes already in the past 5 years compared to the 5 year prior. If I can push you into trying to, as someone that is again seeing a lot, talking to a lot of people, getting a lot of the feel, where do you think procurement in specific, or more generally, where do you think we're going? Where do you think, how do you think, what is good tips for folks right now to think about as they building their teams or trying to improve their teams or thinking about the next 5 years?
Yeah. So very specifically on procurement, I think all the procurement skills and the skill set, very traditional skill set, still valid, right? You need to have a really good benchmark. You really need to have those foundational layers. But I've seen a lot of tech over the last 2-3 years, actually the last 4 years, and it's getting exciting. And when I started to make content in 2019, 2020, already at that point, the tech I was seeing really early on, I was like, you know what? I don't feel like procurement teams of the future are going to need anywhere near as many practitioners in roles, right? There was quite literally roles that I was sat alongside, and they were just pushing POs, pushing information. I was like, man, if I ever get offered a role like that, I am never going anywhere near it, because that job's gone, and that was 4 or 5 years ago. And COVID happened, all that good stuff in terms of digital transformation accelerated. So where I see it going, it just feels like we're going to have very lean to non-existent procurement teams. And I don't want to sound like hyperbole. I don't want to sound like ridiculous in that sense, but I almost feel like we're only, and it really depends on the size of the organization. I know you deal with a lot of enterprises. It may look very different there to an SMB mid-market, but it feels like if you have a good tech setup that has good connectivity across the business, this isn't just for procurement. I think anything that's like service-based within the organization, I think legal could be a rife for this, HR especially, because HR often has way more people than any other team. It feels like with the right tech, the right processes built across the organization, that, I think I mentioned this to you before, Sagi, that you can almost be a composer of the orchestra, and the people in your band, they're all the different bits of tech or automations, and I think Gen AI, it's hard not to talk about it. I almost thought I wasn't going to talk about it throughout this, but it's going to be able to create new things for us, new content. And I mean new content, like new contracts, new RFP documents and things like that, which typically require a person to spend a ridiculous amount of time on. Or I almost think what's worse at the moment is precedence wise. Oh, we use this RFP template in the last one, and not tailoring it and not building it specifically for the requirement. It feels like a lot of that work is just going to go. And I'm really excited by that. And I think businesses will be able to operate way leaner in these areas, and probably put more resources somewhere else, maybe into the areas that make more money, as opposed to the areas that are trying to keep compliance, keep saving money. So I don't think it's the end of procurement by any means, but I do think it will look drastically different. So skill set wise, being able to architect all of what I've just said, I think is going to be an incredible skill. So I think people should be learning no-code solutions. They should be learning, how do I make processes simpler than ever? How do I make processes for a digital first way? One bit of advice, and I think you're going to ask me a question about advice, but I just want to say one bit of really bad advice I see thrown around everywhere, which is like, oh, master like manual processes first before you do digital. And I like no part of that computes with me, because what you can do with digital is so widely different. You might as well say, might as well go learn Spanish and then, because that will help you learn French. I don't know. I don't speak any other languages. I'm awful like that. But like what you can do digitally now is so incredible compared to what you can do via email or a spreadsheet. Like that, I'd almost say like the latter there isn't really a process. Go digital first with all your thinking and really expose yourself to as much of that as possible, because you're just going to really get left behind. And I think people are getting left behind right now. And I'd be scared for them, to be honest.
I think it's important, right? It's like sometimes it's not a fun thing to hear, but I think it's important. I think I use, by the way, sometimes the example of an electric saw, right? Like if you have an electric saw everywhere, you don't have to learn how to use, to your point, how to use the manual saw. But more
Yeah,
than that,
that's it.
more than that, if your entire focus is on having the right muscles to do the manual saw, and now you can use a electric saw for everything, you need to rethink about what in your experience is gonna, because that's the one thing that people have, and that has been in roles that might not be there as the same way that they are today, which is experience. Now,
Yeah.
what can you learn now to convert that experience into a leverage with the new tools that exist? And I think that's something that never change, because any new technology comes and goes, depends on the depth that you can integrate and ingrain it. And
Yeah.
if it stays high level and doesn't get deep enough, then it will never work. And so to make it work, you need the people, honestly, to configure it or to train it, or you can use a different verb, depends on on what it
You
is.
need the
But
people,
yeah,
and
but you need, yeah. So
yeah,
how
it's
do you
almost
position?
cliched, but yeah, and I think you made a really good point about it. Is how I've been thinking about it is, we've got people who are incredibly experienced, and that experience there, sadly, is almost becoming obsolete because of the way tech is going. But they're obviously super switched on. They're smart people. And it's just thinking about, we spoke earlier about gaining influences and building better processes. Everything requires a daily iteration. Just focus a little bit different. So if you are one of those super experienced people, and I don't mean like you've been doing it for 50 years, like you'd be experienced after 2 years in some organizations, or less depending on the type of organization. But it's just thinking about like, how do we change, what we've been doing? How do we get ready for the future that is seemingly coming faster than I think people ever dreamt of in many ways?
Yeah, and I think this is a simple way to think about it, is that if you are a person that is in such a role and you're spending your time thinking whether a change will happen, then the change will definitely happen to you.
Yeah,
Versus
yeah, so
you
true.
just you just assume that it will happen, and then you are actually, and I'm connecting back to the majority of this conversation, trying to find ways to become influencer on that
Mm,
change, of that change, and on that change. So influence the way that change happens and how you are part of it, then by just basic physics, you will be part of it. And so it's a funny concept, but really change will happen to you whether you like it or not. You can either be part of it and help guide it, or then become the least desired outcome of it.
yeah.
Anyway, good point all around. Maybe to finish this, what I always like to ask is, during your career, during jumping through different things, ending up where you are, what is one kind of pay forward advice that you maybe got early in your career or recent that you think is worth sharing?
Yeah. This bit of advice, by the way, may be controversial. I've shared it with other people and they're like, man, like that is terrible advice. But honestly, this advice served me so well. And there was this guy in my first role, and he was like a bit senior than me, quite a bit more senior than me. And we got on. And he just simply looked at me one day and he was like, do you know how I got promoted quickly within 2 years? And I was like, how? And I just didn't do any of the work I didn't want to do, any of the bad work, any of the repetitive work, anything that looked like it wouldn't really be seen to be as influencing within the organization. To come back to that, I used to just say no to it. And he was like, do that. I was like, you can just say no to it. And he's like, yeah, just say no to it. Just say, oh, I want to do this stuff instead. Because it's ridiculous how many people don't actively put forward, hey, I actually want to go work on that project and deliver it. We were just talking about taking these risks. I think whenever someone comes to you with some work, like, you actually have a decision that you can make. Do I just accept it and then maybe risk not doing something that's good? Maybe if it's good work, you don't need to worry. I'd say 90% of the time, taking on that advice. Of course, there's some stuff that you can't get out of. And that's the kind of work that I like to automate and get rid of. But for everything else, I try and do the work that is exciting for me personally, the work that I think is going to set me up for the future. And I have no regrets about taking that advice on and actually going to the extreme with it. So yeah, it's maybe a little bit unconventional in that sense, but yeah, it changed my way of thinking about things.
I love it. I think it might be unconventional in the way it sounds, but I think it is founded in the exact same point, right, that you mentioned with the choosing the path that is not obvious and it might be risky. Now, it is a good way to sell that concept by saying, just say no to things you don't want to do. If you just say no to everything, you're going to get fired.
Yeah, exactly. There's a balance there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the point you made as the completion of that point is that say no to things you don't want to do, but then say, I want to do that instead.
Yeah.
That's where you really take the risk, but that's also where you take initiative. And that's what you say, I want to do this. And if you've been told, okay, you know what? Okay, don't do this thing that you want. Now you're on the hook for it, right? Now you said, I want to do this. You better excel at it. And if you do, you're going to get promoted because that's how it works. But you have to take that chance and you take that risk and you got to face the music if it doesn't work.
Yeah, that's it.
And the no regrets point. I think it's a great advice. I think it's actually a very visual way to also remember it.
Yeah. I wish I was that good at giving advice, but if anyone ever asks, I just repeat that because I don't think anything will really beat it, to be honest, for me personally.
Cool. Nice. Okay, great. If people want to continue and nerd out with you on all the above, where can they find you? LinkedIn, X?
Yeah, I just say LinkedIn. Yeah, LinkedIn's good, and I'm sure they can find me from there. But it's just good to come on and talk about all of this kind of stuff with you. It's been good fun.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Daniel. That was really fun.
Appreciate it. Cheers.